The royal guard who caught a knife in midair. Welcome to our channel, where every story comes alive in ways you've never imagined. We're thrilled to have you with us today. Before we dive into today's tale, we'd love to hear from you. Let us know where you're watching from in the comments below. Your support means the world to us, so don't forget to hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications. That way, you won't miss our next incredible story coming your way tomorrow. Ready for a journey? Let's begin. The sun had barely risen over Buckingham Palace, casting a soft golden glow across the stone courtyard. It was a perfect day for the changing of the guard ceremony, the air crisp and clear, a sea of eager tourists already gathering to witness the iconic display of tradition. The sound of the crowd's chatter filled the air, but among all the excitement, one thing stood out. Something wasn't quite right. Sergeant Michael Harris, 33, stood motionless in his royal red uniform, his gaze fixed straight ahead, eyes sharp as he took his position among the British Royal Guards. The crowd admired the flawless precision of the guards, their perfectly synchronized movements a testament to centuries of military discipline. But today, the atmosphere felt different. There was a sense of unease lingering in the air, a quiet tension that only someone with experience could sense. Far off to the side, Colonel James Carter, 58, a retired military officer, surveyed the crowd with the same sharpness that had earned him years of recognition in the armed forces. He stood beside his 8-year-old grandson, Jake, who was bouncing with excitement, unaware of the subtle shift in the mood around them. Carter's eyes scanned the faces in the crowd, his instincts honed through decades of service, always aware of his surroundings, always calculating potential threats. Then his gaze landed on one individual, a man standing unnaturally still amidst the moving crowd. It wasn't a natural stance, not the posture of someone who was admiring the ceremony or taking pictures. No, this figure was different. The man's body was perfectly still, his shoulders squared, weight evenly balanced, his right hand concealed. In his coat pocket, Carter's mind clicked into gear. Something was wrong. "Grandpa, when will the guards move? They look like statues." Jake tugged on his sleeve, excited for the ceremony to begin. But Carter's attention never wavered from the suspicious figure. He leaned down to his grandson, his voice low but commanding. "Just a moment, Jake." Carter's training told him to act quickly. He approached a passing security officer, keeping his voice steady. "The man by the west barrier, dark jacket, baseball cap. He's displaying pre-attack indicators. I suggest you check him out." The officer nodded politely but dismissed him with a smile. "Thank you, sir, but we have protocols in place. Please enjoy the ceremony." Carter's instincts screamed at him that something wasn't right. He gently guided Jake behind a stone pillar, creating a barrier between the boy and the potential threat. "Stay here, Jake. Don't move." The suspicious figure was now moving. Closer to Sergeant Harris, his steps calculated, each bringing him closer to the guard. Carter's eyes tracked every movement, his military experience reading the man's body language with precision. The figure was testing the boundaries, inching closer with every step, his hand still clutching something hidden in his pocket. Carter's mind processed everything, the man's stance, his movements, the glint of metal barely visible within, his coat. It wasn't a coincidence. The figure's body language shifted as he raised his voice, engaging in a heated argument with some American tourists. His outburst was loud, deliberate, a perfect distraction for anyone who would be watching. Carter's sharp eyes noticed how the man's chest rose and fell in controlled, steady breaths, preparing for something. The crowd was distracted by the confrontation, and in that moment, Carter knew the real threat was coming. The security personnel, focused on the verbal exchange, weren't watching the true danger. As the figure's hand emerged from his pocket, revealing the flashing gleam of a knife, time seemed to slow down for Carter. Meanwhile, Sergeant Harris, still standing at attention, had already noticed the movement in his peripheral vision. His body remained still, but his mind was racing, calculating the knife's trajectory. The seconds stretched on, but to Harris they were more than just moments. They were years of training compressed into a split-second decision. As the knife flew toward him, Harris moved with the precision and speed only a seasoned veteran could possess. His right arm broke the stillness of the ceremonial guard, moving upward to intercept the blade. In a fraction of a second, he caught the knife in midair, stopping it dead in its tracks. The crowd gasped in unison, stunned by what they had just witnessed. To them, it was as if the knife had materialized in Harris's hand out of nowhere. But for Harris, it was a calculated move, his mind and body working together in perfect harmony to stop a tragedy before it could unfold. The tension in the air was palpable as the seconds ticked by. Colonel James Carter's heart raced, but his mind remained as sharp and steady as it had ever been. He had seen chaos before, countless times in the military, but this moment was different. The stakes were higher, the threat more imminent. And it wasn't just his own life at risk. His grandson, Jake, stood right behind him, unaware of the danger unfolding just feet away. The figure, the one Carter had been watching so closely, was now moving steadily toward Sergeant Harris. The man's every step was deliberate, calculated, as if he were stalking his prey. Carter's instincts screamed at him to act. He had to stop this. He couldn't let it happen, not while Jake was watching, not while the lives of so many others were hanging in the balance. "Grandpa, when are they going to do something?" Jake asked, his voice a mix of impatience and excitement. He was still so young, so innocent. He had no idea how close they were to catastrophe. Carter's hand tightened around the boy's shoulder, pulling him closer as the scene unfolded before them. Carter's military training kicked in like a reflex. His mind was processing every detail, reading the situation like a map. The figure wasn't just moving closer to Harris, he was getting closer to striking. His hand remained in his coat pocket, a clear indication that something deadly was concealed within. The man was preparing for an attack, and Carter knew it was only a matter of time before the knife would be thrown. The sound of the crowd's chatter seemed to fade away, replaced by the steady beat of Carter's own heart. The air felt thicker, heavier. He could feel the weight of the situation pressing down on him, but his thoughts were clear. He had been in worse situations before, war zones, intense firefights, but this was different. This was the heart of London, the royal grounds, a place that symbolized tradition and history, and it was under threat. The figure now raised his voice, creating a scene. He confronted a group of tourists, loudly spouting off about colonialism and the oppression of traditions. The outburst wasn't just for attention. It was a calculated move, the perfect distraction to allow the real attack to happen. Carter's eyes narrowed. This wasn't a random confrontation. This was premeditated, a setup, and Carter was the only one who saw it. The man's chest was rising and falling in controlled, rhythmic breaths. His stance was wide, knees slightly bent, preparing for movement. Carter could practically feel the man's energy pulsing, ready to spring into action. His eyes flicked toward the pocket where the knife was still concealed. It wouldn't be long before the weapon came out. Every instinct Carter had sharpened during his years in the military was screaming at him to do something. But what could he do? The security personnel were still oblivious to the true threat, distracted by the loud theatrical confrontation. Carter couldn't wait for them to react. He had to act now. His hand moved instinctively, pushing Jake further behind the pillar, protecting him from any potential harm. Carter's voice dropped lower, his tone commanding yet calm. "Stay here. Don't move, Jake. Do you understand?" Jake nodded, still oblivious to the danger surrounding them. As the figure's hand emerged from his pocket, Carter's mind was already calculating. The knife gleamed in the sunlight, reflecting the chaos of the moment. In that instant, the world seemed to freeze. The knife was coming for Harris, and Carter knew he had only a fraction of a second to act. The next few moments unfolded like a slow-motion film in Carter's mind. The attacker's hand shot forward, and Carter's body moved with the fluidity of a soldier in the heat of battle. He wasn't going to let anyone get hurt today, not on his watch. He looked at Harris, who was still standing motionless, seemingly unaware of the impending attack. But Carter knew better. He had seen it before. Harris's training was already preparing him for what was coming. The knife hurtled through the air with deadly precision, its blade aimed straight for Harris's chest. It was coming fast, too fast for anyone to react. But then something incredible happened. Harris's right arm broke the stillness of his ceremonial pose and shot upward. With lightning speed, his gloved hand closed around the knife just inches from his chest, stopping the attack dead in its tracks. The crowd gasped. Carter stood frozen for a moment, his heart pounding in his chest. He couldn't believe what he had just seen. It was the kind of response you only read about in military textbooks, but here, in front of his very eyes, it had become a reality. Harris had done it. He had saved countless lives with a movement so quick, so precise that it was almost unreal. For a moment, time stood still. Carter exhaled sharply, his muscles relaxing just slightly as the adrenaline began to ebb. The danger had passed. Harris had done it. But as the crowd began to cheer and the scene returned to normal, Carter knew this was just the beginning of something much bigger than anyone could have ever expected. The crowd's gasps slowly faded, but for Colonel James Carter, the scene remained, frozen in his mind. The adrenaline was still coursing through his veins, making his muscles tense as he observed every minute detail. It wasn't over yet. The danger hadn't passed entirely, even though the knife had been caught. His eyes never left the figure who had launched the attack. He could feel it, the stillness in the air, the weight of something yet to unfold. The tourists around him were starting to applaud, completely unaware of the grave situation that had just been averted. Carter's mind raced, analyzing the scenario, over and over again. He had seen similar situations before, but something about today felt different. This was no ordinary threat. This wasn't just an isolated incident. There was something bigger at play. Sergeant Harris, standing with the knife now safely gripped in his hand, was still frozen in place. His eyes were locked on the point of impact, his focus unbroken. To the onlookers, Harris was the epitome of discipline. To Carter, he was a man who had just saved lives. His military training, honed over years of service, had allowed him to react with such precision that the blade had never reached its target. But Carter knew that there was no room for complacency. Even as the knife had been intercepted, he felt the pulse of danger still running through the air. He glanced over his shoulder where Jake stood behind the pillar, oblivious to the storm that had just passed over them. Carter's hand moved instinctively, pulling the boy even closer, his protective instincts heightened. He couldn't afford to take his eyes off the potential threat now. The figure had been subdued for the moment, but Carter wasn't naive enough to think that was the end of it. No, he knew that the attacker had been in control of the situation the entire time. The outburst, the calculated distraction, it was all part of the plan. He had seen the signs long before anyone else, but now with Harris standing victorious, there was no turning back. The crowd had started to settle into its usual rhythm again, some people still snapping photos, others simply waiting for the ceremony to continue. But Carter's gaze never wavered from the man who had attempted to carry out the attack. He watched as the individual, now realizing the failure of his mission, started to back away slowly, his eyes darting nervously from side to side. The man had been caught off guard by the speed and precision of Harris's response. The perfect timing, the flawless interception, it had shaken him. Carter could see it in his eyes. But what bothered him even more was the realization that this wasn't the man's first attempt. It couldn't have been. The way he had moved, the way he had calculated every step, every moment, it spoke of a level of experience that suggested this wasn't a random act of violence. This was deliberate, planned, and he had almost succeeded. "Stay close, Jake," Carter whispered again, his voice low but commanding. He couldn't afford to let his guard down, not even for a second. His eyes flicked between Harris, still standing perfectly still, and the figure now retreating into the crowd. He needed to act quickly. In a split second, Carter took a step forward, keeping his hand firmly on Jake's shoulder, guiding him through the crowd with urgency. He moved toward the security personnel, whose attention had now been drawn by the growing commotion. Carter couldn't trust them to react quickly enough. They were too focused on the surface-level distractions. "That man," Carter said, his voice steady but filled with authority. "He's part of it. Get someone to follow him, Now, the officer, who had dismissed Carter earlier, nodded with a look of disbelief. He knew better than to question the colonel now. The figure, meanwhile, had slipped deeper into the crowd, his movements growing more erratic. He was trying to blend in, to disappear, but Carter's trained eyes were still on him. He wasn't going to let him get away. Not now. Not after what had just happened. Sergeant Harris, still holding the knife, took one step back, carefully positioning himself between the crowd and the retreating attacker. He hadn't moved a muscle since the interception. His eyes remained locked on the individual, scanning every movement, every twitch. It was clear to Carter that Harris was prepared for anything. Even though the danger had passed, Harris remained ready for the next strike. This was the true essence of military discipline, an unwavering vigilance, a constant state of preparedness. But Carter couldn't afford to wait for the next move. The attack had been neutralized, yes, but the truth was this was only the beginning. Whoever this person was, whatever group he was affiliated with, there was more to come. Carter's instincts told him that this incident was just a piece of a much larger puzzle. The air around Buckingham Palace seemed to hum with a quiet intensity, like the calm before a storm. The tourists, still unaware of the near catastrophe, went about their business, snapping pictures and chatting among themselves. The changing of the guard ceremony, once the focal point of the day, now felt like a distant memory. For Colonel James Carter, the sense of relief that had briefly washed over him evaporated quickly. The real threat wasn't gone. Not yet. Carter's sharp gaze never left the retreating figure. The man who had tried to kill Sergeant Michael Harris was slipping deeper into the crowd, trying to blend in, trying to escape. But Carter had seen enough in his military career to recognize a predator in the wild. He knew when the hunt wasn't over, and he was right. "Stay close to me, Jake," Carter murmured, his voice tight with urgency. The boy, still wide-eyed with excitement from the ceremony, hadn't yet fully grasped the gravity of what had just transpired. His grandfather's grip tightened on his shoulder as they moved through the crowd. Carter's instincts screamed at him to stay focused. He couldn't let anything, nothing, distract him from the man who had just attempted to assassinate a royal guard. Meanwhile, Harris stood motionless, his white-gloved hand still gripping the knife, now an inert object, a weapon rendered harmless. He had caught it with an almost supernatural speed. But Carter knew better than to think the danger was over. Harris didn't flinch, his gaze never wavering from the crowd, from the man who had thrown the knife. Every second counted, and Harris knew this as well as Carter did. Carter pushed through the sea of tourists, his eyes darting from one face to the next, scanning for any signs of danger. His military experience had trained him to assess situations with cold precision. He could feel the subtle shift in the crowd as people began to realize that something was wrong, that something had happened, but they couldn't pinpoint it. They were blissfully unaware of the life or death drama unfolding just beyond their line of sight. His mind worked in overdrive, calculating the angles, the possibilities, the movements of the threat. The man who had thrown the knife hadn't just disappeared into the crowd. He had a purpose. Carter's gut told him that this was only part of something bigger. A distraction? An attempt to take down Harris, but why? What was the motive? Was this just an isolated incident, or was there something more? "Grandpa, where are we going?" Jake's innocent voice pulled Carter back to the present. He glanced down at the boy, who was still looking up at him, wide-eyed and trusting. The innocence in Jake's expression only made Carter's determination sharper. He couldn't let this happen again, not when his grandson was so close. "We're going to make sure everyone's safe, Jake," Carter said quietly. "Don't worry." Carter's eyes flicked back to Harris, still standing at attention, as though nothing had happened. But Carter could see the slight tension in Harris's posture, the subtle shift of his weight, as if he too knew this was far from over. It wasn't just the assassin they had to worry about. Whoever was behind this attack had likely been watching, Harris studying him, waiting for the right moment to strike. And now, with the knife thrown and intercepted, that moment had come and gone. But Carter wasn't foolish enough to believe that this was the end. The person responsible wasn't going to give up so easily. The way they had manipulated the crowd, the way they had planned the distraction, it wasn't a random attack. It was calculated. Carter moved quickly, stepping in front of Jake and positioning himself between the boy and the crowd, his eyes constantly scanning for any signs of the attacker. He noticed something, a figure off to the side, moving swiftly but carefully, eyes darting toward Harris and then away. It wasn't a direct approach, but it was a careful one. This was it. The man was preparing to make his next move, as the eyes. Seconds ticked by, Carter's heart raced in his chest. He couldn't afford to waste time. The security personnel were still too far behind, still caught up in the aftermath of the first threat. But this was his job now. He was the one who had seen it coming. And now he had to stop it before anyone else got hurt. Carter moved with purpose, breaking into a quick stride as he approached the suspicious figure. His every step was calculated, precise. He wasn't going to let this attack get any closer. As he moved, his eyes never left Harris, who was still standing guard. The knife now secured in his hand, a symbol of the dangerous moment they had just survived. Harris's eyes flicked toward Carter, a brief acknowledgement of their shared understanding. In that moment, Carter knew they had to act fast, before the attacker could regroup, before he could launch another strike. The tension in the air at Buckingham Palace was thick, suffocating, as if time itself had slowed. The tourists, still oblivious to the danger that had just passed, continued snapping pictures and chatting amongst themselves. But Carter wasn't fooled. He had seen enough to know that the situation wasn't over. There was more lurking in the shadows, more that had yet to unfold. Behind him, Sergeant Harris stood motionless, his right hand still tightly gripping the knife. The Royal Guard had done his duty. He had intercepted the blade with perfect precision, saving countless lives in the process. But Carter could feel that they weren't out of the woods just yet. Harris's body may have been at attention, but his mind was alert, calculating every possible move, as if waiting for the next attack. It was a familiar feeling to Carter, a soldier's sixth sense, that something bigger was at play here. The figure who had thrown the knife was still out there somewhere. Carter had been tracking him, every move in the crowd, every flicker of movement. The man hadn't just disappeared into the masses, he had been part of a much larger plan. But the question remained, what was his objective? And more importantly, who was behind it? Carter pulled Jake closer, shielding him with his own body as he scanned the area. The boy, still unaware of the gravity of the situation, tugged at his grandfather's sleeve. "Grandpa, what's going on? Why is everyone acting so strange?" Jake asked, his voice tinged with confusion. Carter paused, looking down at him. His young, innocent eyes saw the world in simple terms. Everything was either exciting or boring, and this situation was far from boring. But Carter couldn't afford to let his guard down. Not for a second. "Stay close, Jake," Carter said, his voice firm yet gentle. "This isn't over yet. We need to make sure no one else gets hurt." Carter's eyes darted back to Harris, still standing at his post, his eyes now scanning the crowd with a practiced precision. The man had been through countless dangerous situations, but today was different. Today, he had caught a knife mid-air, a feat that most could only dream of. But that wasn't the end of the story. No, there was still danger lurking, and Carter wasn't going to take any chances. As Carter surveyed the crowd, he saw the figure once more, moving quickly and purposefully, slipping through the masses. His movements were deliberate, trying to blend in while keeping his eyes locked on the Royal Guard. Carter's instincts flared, his military training kicking in. This wasn't just some random attacker. This man was part of something bigger, a coordinated effort. And it was clear now he wasn't alone. Carter's mind raced as he processed the information. The attacker had created a distraction, the verbal confrontation with the tourists to pull focus away from his true target. It had been calculated, planned. Everything about this attack had been deliberate, and now, it seemed, the real purpose was beginning to unfold. The assassin had failed to take out Harris, but there was still a plan in motion. Security. Carter barked to a nearby officer, his voice filled with urgency. "Get someone on that figure moving through the crowd. They're trying to slip away, but we can't let them disappear." The officer looked momentarily stunned, but Carter didn't wait for a response. He knew he had to act fast. His eyes tracked the man's every movement, following him as he moved with an almost unnatural precision. The figure glanced over his shoulder, clearly aware that he was being pursued, but Carter was already closing in. This was it. The man had made a fatal mistake by underestimating Carter's experience. He was about to be caught. The man's pace quickened, but Carter was faster. With a swift, determined movement, he broke into a jog, using the crowded space to his advantage. He wasn't about to let this attacker slip away again. Harris, still standing tall and vigilant, watched the scene unfold, his grip on the knife, tight as he remained ready for whatever came next. As Carter closed the gap, he reached out, his hand grasping the man's shoulder in a vice-like grip. The figure spun around, eyes wide with shock, as if he hadn't expected to be caught. But Carter had seen it all before. This wasn't his first chase, nor would it be his last. With a twist of his wrist, Carter pulled the man to the side, pinning him against a stone wall. The crowd continued to mill about, none the wiser to the drama unfolding just steps away from them. Carter's voice was low, steely with authority, as he addressed the man. "It's over. You're not getting away," Carter said, his voice calm, but filled with the weight of years of experience. The figure's eyes flickered with a mix of fear and determination. But there was no escaping now. Carter had them, and this time there would be no more distractions, no more slipping away into the crowd. Behind them, Harris's stance remained unwavering. The Royal Guard had done his part, but Carter knew they had both played a critical role in stopping this attack. Together, they had ensured that the threat had been neutralized. As the security personnel moved in, Carter took one last look around the crowd. His protective instincts, honed over years of service, told him that this was only one piece of the puzzle. There would be more, but for now the immediate danger had passed and the story for today had reached its end. What an incredible moment we've just witnessed together, right? But now we want to hear from you. What do you think about the unbelievable skill and quick thinking of Sergeant Harris in the face of danger? Have you ever experienced a moment where instinct took over, just like he did? This story raises so many questions, from the tension in the crowd to the silent vigilance of those standing guard. We know it's easy to just watch and move on, but we'd love for you to dive deeper into this story with us. Share your thoughts in the comments below. What would you have done if you were in Carter's or Harris's shoes? Did you feel the same sense of unease as Carter when he noticed the threat in the crowd? And don't forget, this story is just the beginning. There's much more to explore, so make sure you hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications. We'll be back tomorrow with more thrilling stories, so you won't want to miss out. Your feedback is invaluable to us, and your insights make these discussions even richer. Let's keep the conversation going. Drop your thoughts below, and let's talk about what really happens when danger strikes.